Hi, it's Katrina.
Inca Mummy of the Andes. Climbers discovered something gruesome and shocking high in the Andes Mountains of South America. At the top of Mount Uyayaco, they came across remains of an almost perfectly preserved Inca girl wrapped in a blanket. This discovery was made in Argentina, and the preserved girl looked as though she had been frozen just hours before the team of researchers found her. In truth, she had been sitting on top of that mountain for roughly 500 years. She was part of the Inca civilization and was one of 3 children taken to the peak of the volcano at about 22,000 feet. And there, she and the other 2 children were drugged with cocaine and alcohol before being placed inside of a small cavern under the ground and left as sacrifice. The deaths of these children were part of an obscure Inca ritual. They were sacrificed for something scientists have only ever been able to speculate on. Nobody has figured out why the kids were taken to such an insanely high spot on the mountain. Normally, in Inca society, the act of child sacrifice was used to commemorate something important. If a great leader died, children needed to be given to the gods. If there was a great famine and people were dying, the same thing had to happen. And although this was just another part of Inca society, it wasn't taken lightly. Such a sacrifice could only be made with the direct approval of the Inca emperor. Interestingly, the children chosen for such sacrifices were almost always the sons and daughters of local nobility. The 3 children found at the summit of Uyayaco are now considered to be among the best preserved mummies on Earth. Because of the freezing temperatures at the peak of the mountain, the children have never been able to decay, making them better preserved than almost any mummy ever found. Wyoming Sky Villages. The Wind River Range is part of the Rocky Mountains, and it stretches 100 miles across northern Wyoming. It goes all the way from the thick forests of Yellowstone National Park to the sprawling grasslands of the Great Plains. The tallest peaks are about 13,000 feet above sea level and contain a landscape of high-altitude summits and tundra, along with the few remaining glaciers in America from the Ice Age. It's within this mountain range that one of the oldest high-altitude settlements in America can be found. The site is known as High Rise Village, and it's 11,000 feet above sea level, extending out from the side of a hill. It would have made living here a diagonal nightmare, like living on the edge of a ski run. And yet it was a huge settlement occupied by the Shoshone people about 4,000 years ago. They lived here until the end of the 19th century, when Europeans dominated the landscape. The site was discovered in 2006 by Richard Adams with the University of Wyoming. It was the first and biggest of over 20 similar settlements in the Wind River Mountains. About 4,000 years ago, this was a prehistoric landscape. There used to be villages and paths winding through the alpine tundra. Several outposts were also located here, and there was plenty of food for everyone to eat. There was a thriving culture of Native Americans, way above the other groups and safe in the natural defense of the mountains. Ural Mountains Moose. There is a massive moose hidden in the Ural Mountains of Siberia. It was discovered in 2011 by a group of researchers led by Alexander Shestakov. It came as a big shock, because the moose is a geoglyph, and it looks like something you would expect to find grouped in with the Nazca lines of Peru. But this was found high in the rural Siberian mountains, an impressive rock geoglyph stretching 900 feet long. Researchers dated the structure as being built sometime between 4000 and 3000 BC. This makes the geoglyph extraordinarily old. At maximum, it was made 6,000 years ago and is still visible from the air today. Recent excavations unveiled 155 stone tools near the geoglyph, most of which were likely used for digging up or breaking stones. Stanislav Grigoriev from the Chelyabinsk History and Archaeology Institute says the tools appear to have been used by adults and children. The Neolithic people living in the mountains brought the whole community together to participate in the creation of the moose. Entire families and their tiny children helped dig trenches 30 feet wide, then filled them with stone to create the outline of the moose. Still, the geoglyph is a massive mystery, since nothing like it has ever been found before in the region, and archaeologists don't understand what the purpose of such a gigantic stone creature was. Masada. 1,300 feet above the Dead Sea in Israel is an ancient stone fortress. It's sitting atop a rocky mesa, a high-altitude plateau overlooking a vast landscape full of lost history from the days of the Bible. The ancient fortress is called Masada, and it's one of the most important World Heritage Sites in the entire world. Masada's significance has to do with the Jewish people and their Roman enemies. In the 1st century BC, Herod the Great, the king of Judea, built Masada as a castle complex for himself. Then, when the Romans took over several decades later, the fortress became a last stand for the Jewish people. The Romans annexed Judea and built a garrison inside King Herod's fortress. However, then came the Great Revolt of 66 AD. A group of angry Jewish people, tired of being subjugated, stormed Masada and took over the mountain complex. Unfortunately, the rebels were outnumbered by the Romans. The leader, named Menahem, was murdered, and Jerusalem was destroyed. The few rebels still alive at Masada were then hunted down by the Romans. The 960 surviving rebels were soon under siege by a legion of 8,000 Romans. After several months stuck inside the castle, the Jewish rebels had no hope of escaping. When it became clear they were about to meet their fate at the hands of the Romans, they flung themselves off the side of the mountain to prevent the massacre. Masada was then abandoned and was turned into a monastery. In the 7th century, the fortress was deserted again, and the site wasn't rediscovered by archaeologists until 1828. Lot's Monastery. In the Bible, God agreed that he would spare the people of Sodom from destruction if he could only find a few decent human beings among the sinners. But this was a difficult task, and the only good-natured souls he found were those of Lot and his family. And so God destroyed the city of Sodom and all the sinners inside with a great fiery blast. After the destruction of Sodom, Lot and his family fled and sought shelter in a mountain cave. The exact cave in which the biblical family took refuge can be found today near the Dead Sea in Jordan, close to the modern town of Safi. This is where archaeology and the Bible come together. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of human habitation around the cave dating to the 1st century BC. This suggests that during the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a primitive Bronze Age presence here. Then, in the 5th century, a monastery was built within the cave to honor Lot and his family. The only thing missing is evidence that Lot himself lived in the cave. All we've really been able to discover is that some people lived nearby, and that Lot's secret cave was a sacred place of worship for the Christians and the Muslims until at least the end of the 9th century. It was around then that the monastery was abandoned. Ellora Mountain Caves. The Ellora Mountain Caves, also known as Ellora, is a sacred site in India dating back to about 1,500 years ago. The caves are all part of one major archaeological site, but they are spread out within the Sahyadri Hills. There are a total of 35 caves, each one filled with spectacular monuments to either Hinduism, Buddhism, or Jainism. Ellora is one of the most impressive rock-cut architectural wonders in India. Most of the caves are natural, but many have been widened and improved upon to make them more impressive. The most spectacular thing about them is that they contain various statues and decorations. The earliest cave, which dates back to the 6th century AD, celebrates Hinduism and is known as the Hindu Ramesvara. It's loaded with vestibules and high-relief friezes, and great carvings showing scenes from the Hindu sacred text called the Puranas. Another cave has spectacular carvings of river goddesses on its exterior, with a massive dancing Shiva inside, along with an image of the buffalo demon king. We can also see in these mountain caves how religion changed throughout the centuries in ancient India. Most of the carvings are decorated in Hindu reliefs starting in the 6th century. However, there are Buddhist caves that appear in the 7th and 8th centuries. These caves have figures of Buddha instead of the mythological figures from Hinduism. The preferred religion of the area depended on who the king was at the time, and so it was frequently switched back and forth. Monte Alban. Monte Alban is one of the biggest ceremonial sites found anywhere in Mesoamerica. It's only exceeded in size by Teotihuacan, which is located near Mexico City. This is quite impressive considering the sheer number of ritual hubs found throughout the old kingdoms of the Toltec, Maya, Aztec, and Olmec. The mysterious mountain ruins here contain some of the oldest writing in all of Mexico. There are strange rock engravings called danzantes that show humanoid beings with weird features. Between the bizarre carvings and the almost hieroglyphic script, some have suggested the people of Monte Alban had contact with a culture from the other side of the world. What we do know based on archaeological excavations is that the original buildings of Monte Alban were built around 1000 BC. However, it's unclear who exactly built them. This is because about 900 years later, the Zapotec showed up and destroyed the original buildings, constructing their own structures on top of them. The astronomical observatories and huge pyramids standing at Monte Alban today are the newest features of the site, built over the ruins of even older buildings. Termessos. Solimões was an Anatolian god worshipped in ancient Turkey. He was later identified with the Greek god Zeus and was worshipped by the cult of Zeus Solimões. This was typical in many parts of the ancient world. One deity would become popular in a place far from its original home, and it would be merged with the local gods to create a kind of super god. This god is associated with the city of Termessos. It was built and inhabited by a group called the Solimi, who derived their name from the god Solimões. These people, little more than a small tribe in ancient history, built this city around 2,000 years ago in the Taurus mountain range. Sadly, this is all we know about the ancient tribe and their city. The only historical account we have comes from the Anabis of Alexander, written by Arrian of Nicomedia while Alexander the Great was still alive. In the ancient text, it says that Alexander surrounded the mountain city of Termessos in 333 BC, but he failed to capture it. Alexander said the city was like an eagle's nest, sheltered in the mountains, and impossible to take for himself. The conqueror eventually left the city to its own devices, and in 71 BC, the people of Termessos became allies of Rome. Its population reached a maximum of about 150,000 residents, but by the 5th century AD, the whole place was abandoned. Its position in the mountains proved unwise, as the whole city was brought to ruin by an earthquake. The Hall of Records. There is a place in the United States that looks like something you would expect to find in the mountains of old Persia. It's called the Hall of Records, and it's located at Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. Carved in stone behind the head of President Abraham Lincoln is a massive chamber which contains all the history of America up until the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt. While this isn't an ancient archaeological site, it most certainly will be in the future. If the American civilization ever collapses and Mount Rushmore falls to pieces, this vault will be discovered thousands of years from now. People in the future will uncover a mysterious time capsule within a 70-foot cavern blasted out of the mountainside using dynamite in 1938. Oddly enough, shortly into the project, the mastermind behind it, Gutzon Borglum, died unexpectedly. His plan was to create a deep vault holding a copy of everything from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, with the vault accessible by a huge staircase winding up the mountain. However, after he died in 1941, the government decided it wasn't worth it to preserve history for the future. They didn't want to spend the money, so they abandoned the project. It wasn't until 1998 that 16 porcelain panels were sealed inside of a titanium vault within the Hall of Records. The vault was then covered by a granite slab and sealed for eternity. The Hall of Records is closed to the public, but it will be an incredible discovery for people in the future who stumble upon it. St. Hilarion Castle. St. Hilarion Castle is the ancient mountain fortress that Walt Disney supposedly used as inspiration for the castle in the Disney classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This ancient building is positioned on the top of a mountain overlooking the city of Gurney in Cyprus. While the castle is little more than a decrepit ruin these days, with its towers crumbling and its roof long since collapsed, it isn't hard to see where Disney got his inspiration from. Long ago, this place really was a fairy tale castle. St. Hilarion Castle gets its name from a hermit who supposedly fled to the top of the mountain following the Arab conquest of the Holy Land. Legend has it there was originally a monastery here that was built in his honor, but no archaeological evidence of such a thing has ever been found. The castle itself was likely built between the 10th and 11th century by the Byzantine Empire, and then was used as a fortress during the Crusades. Cyprus was one of the most crucial strategic military outposts throughout the Crusades because of its convenient location in the Mediterranean Sea. The fortress was built to command the road leading from Kyrenia to Nicosia. It was first used as a defense against Arabian pirates, but then it became a summer residence for French royalty before being abandoned and dismantled in the 15th century.
The Voodoo Temples of Benin. The Republic of Benin is a country in Africa, not to be confused with Benin City, located between Ghana and Nigeria. In the countryside, you can find the ruins of shrines and temples from the ancient Edo people. While these people believe in a single god, they also believe in spirits and ghosts. The national religion here is voodoo, and according to Hollywood myth, voodoo is all about zombies and curses. But there is much, much more to it than that. The historic center of voodoo is the town of Ouida. This city has a very dark past, as it was once the center for Portuguese slavers. As Dan White reported, there is a road here where for 400 years, millions of Africans were led to slavery or death in shackles and chains. The road is now lined with fetishes to remember those who were taken forever. The slaves took the religion of voodoo with them and greatly influenced the culture of the Americas. Voodoo is a way of life with many rituals and folk medical practices passed on through stories and songs. It is a belief in a supreme being called Bondye, but there are many spirits responsible for certain areas of life, such as fertility and agriculture. Animals are an important part of the voodoo practice, and that's why you will see all kinds of animal parts, altered skulls made from ancestors, and sacrifices of blood. 3 hours to the north is the smaller town of Abomi, where an ancient voodoo king once ruled the entire country. The royal palace is a ruin today, scattered with the remains of what were once proud voodoo temples. The palace is so big, it once housed a court of about 10,000 people. But when the French invaded in the 19th century, they burned most of it to the ground. One thing that's still standing is the old throne of King Gezo, a royal seat that is mounted on a pile of human skulls. Ancient golden mask. 1,000 years ago in Peru, a man was laid to rest inside a tomb. He was buried in the dark with a small wealth of golden artifacts, but before he was shut into his dark resting place, his body was scrunched into a ball. He was flipped upside down, his head was chopped off, and a delicate metal mask was placed over it. His head, with the mask attached, was then placed close to his body. Before the tomb was closed, the people who buried him streaked the mask and skeleton in red pigment. This individual was discovered about 30 years ago, but more recently, researchers led by Elisabetta Pires from the University of Oxford wanted to understand more about it. One of the first steps was to look at the paint. The red pigment smeared all over the skull and mask. What they discovered is that the red pigment was actually mixed with human blood. This creepy burial goes back to between the 8th and 14th centuries, when the Lambayeque culture was the most powerful in all of Peru. This was before the rise of the Inca. The old man discovered inside the tomb at the Huacaloro Temple Mound was probably someone of extreme importance to the Lambayeque, buried with 1.2 tons of grave goods, much of which was alloys of gold, silver, and copper. But we don't actually know who he was. And we don't know why his skeleton needed to be smeared in blood and his head removed before he was sealed in his tomb for all time. Tombs under houses. Iranian archaeologists recently discovered a group of tombs while doing some excavations in the province of West Azerbaijan. This particular site is where 9,000 years ago, a group of humans got together and built a settlement. It was one of the very first in the world, and the area continued to be occupied all the way through the Neolithic period and the Chalcolithic period. Because of the presence of rivers, springs, animals, this has been a major hub for human civilization as far back as 7,000 BC. This was the beginning of Mesopotamia. Although these are technically tombs, they aren't as extravagant as you may be thinking. The tombs are simple rectangular blocks, boxes dug into the ground. Researchers actually believe that the tombs were dug underneath the floor of somebody's house inside the settlement. It's a strange phenomenon that's been found in other places around the world, where primitive cultures buried their dead loved ones right under their feet. Caves of Death. The Anshun Caves are also known as the Caves of Death. This dark and dank group of caves in China is home to hundreds of thousands of wooden coffins that have just been dumped on the putrid ground inside a cave to slowly rot. No burial, no tomb, just a body in a wooden box left for time and nature to do its thing. The locals believe that by allowing the bodies to sit above ground when their souls are released, they will find their way to heaven. There are several different caves in the area in China's southwest. In just one cave alone, there were over 500 coffins stacked layer upon layer, with those on the bottom in the most serious states of decay. For the neighboring 5 villages, this has been the only burial ground since ancient times. Nobody knows how long it's been going on, but it certainly goes back thousands of years. According to folklore, it all started when the people of the region left their homeland to avoid war. Their people were being ravaged, and so they sought shelter high in the mountains. They then refused to bury their dead because they were hoping to go back to their homeland. So they stacked the coffins inside the caves, thinking they would come back for them later. Time got away from them, and they never returned to their homeland. And so the custom is still going on to this very day. I want to give a big shout out to Max Wanders and Demetrius Williams. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing discoveries. Skull in Minnesota. 2 kayakers were on the Minnesota River about 100 miles from Minneapolis in the middle of the wilderness when they discovered a human skull. When this happened in 2021, there was a massive drought. Many parts of the river were bone dry, which made the skull a lot easier to spot. But what freaked out the kayakers was that they couldn't find the rest of the skeleton. So they alerted the Renville County Sheriff's Office, and the sheriffs alerted the FBI. Everyone thought they were dealing with a missing person or a murder victim, but a forensic anthropologist took one look at the skull and realized it was ancient. It actually belonged to a man who lived 7,000 years ago. Sheriff Scott Habel told the Washington Post that he and his colleagues were shocked and that none of them had been prepared for an archaeological mystery. The skull showed evidence of blunt force trauma. At some point, the individual had been hit extremely hard on the head with something. There is no way to know exactly what happened, but this Native American had probably taken part in some kind of battle and had the crack in his skull to prove it. The discovery caused problems between Native Americans and local authorities. The sheriff's office posted the discovery on social media, along with pictures of the skull fragment. This post drew criticism from local Native American groups, who said they weren't told about the discovery as required by state law. Instead, they found out on Facebook. If you found a human skull, what would you do? Let me know in the comments below. Viking skin doors. St. Botolph's Church near Cambridge in the United Kingdom looks like a pretty ordinary medieval church, but it comes with a gruesome myth. It's said that in the 19th century, when the church was undergoing repairs, a doorway was found to contain fragments of human skin beneath its metal bands. That skin was supposedly from a Danish Viking who attempted to pillage the church in the 11th century, then was flayed alive, meaning they peeled his skin off. Afterward, they nailed his skin to the door as a warning to any other potential raiders. There are actually 3 medieval churches in England where supposed human skin remains have been discovered on the doors: St. Michael and All Angels Church in Copford and Westminster Abbey in London. Scientists have always been curious whether these are just myths or reality, and so they did some tests. Ron Reed from the University of Leeds checked the material found at St. Botolph in the 1970s and found that yes, it was human skin. Then, in 2022, researchers pooled their resources and checked every scrap of skin ever found on a church door in England. They discovered that actually, the initial test had been wrong. This wasn't human skin at all, but from a cow. One scrap of skin was from a horse. In reality, nobody was probably skinned alive at all, and these were just scraps of leather, tanned hide that had once been fixed to the doors. Mummy paint. Until recently, Europeans had a fascination with using mummies as medicinal ingredients. In medieval times, people would use crushed up mummies for medicine. And starting in the 16th century, they began to use powdered mummies, actual dead human beings taken from graves in Egypt, in their paint. It became a paint color called mummy brown, and it was used all the way into the 19th century. The British portrait painter Sir William Beechey kept a large stock of mummy brown for his own work, and so did the French artist Martin Drawling. With Martin, he also supposedly used mummy brown with paint created from the remains of dead French kings. Even Edward Burne-Jones' The Last Sleep of Arthur in Avalon used mummy brown. It only went out of style in the late 1900s when people began feeling a little more uncomfortable about using dead people in paint mix. The last batch went out in 1964, and these days you'd be hard-pressed to find it anywhere. But there is a really strange artifact at the Bolton Library in England, a tube of mummy brown paint kept inside a miniature coffin that had originally been from a mummified snake or an eel. Voodoo in America. Archaeologists with the University of Maryland have dug up what they say is currently the oldest example of voodoo being practiced in the United States. Researchers believe this is the only object of its kind to be found at an archaeological dig in North America. The object in question is a small clay bundle that was discovered filled with tiny pieces of metal. It had been placed in a street gutter in Annapolis 300 years ago. The object is a direct vestige of the African religion of voodoo and is distinctly different from other practices that were blended over the following centuries. According to anthropologist Mark Leone, the object is African, not African American. What that means is that the people who made it came directly from Africa, and they brought with them their knowledge of charms and the voodoo spirit world. The object is about the size of a football, originally used as a small container to hold an assortment of lead shot pieces, metal pins, and rusty old nails. It was meant as a kind of charm to ward away evil spirits, and it was lost around the year 1700 when the English belief in witchcraft was just beginning to mingle with the African voodoo religion. Mysterious human remains. The ancient remains of a Roman mercenary have just been discovered on the side of a newly built road in the Welsh countryside. The mysterious mercenary has been lying in the dirt for about 2,000 years, buried with his sword and the skeleton of another man who had lost his head. This other individual was buried next to the soldier, but his decapitated head was placed neatly at his feet. Archaeologists also found the remains of farming tools from the Iron Age and some old roundhouses nearby, along with about 450 other skeletons. Just next to this newly built road is an ancient cemetery, but not all the bodies buried here are from the same time. There are actually 3 separate sites, spanning a period of human history going back to the Stone Age. The region was likely popular with humans throughout the centuries because of its proximity to the sea, as well as its rich farming land. Then, during the Roman period, when they started hiring mercenaries from Europe to help defend their British territory, some of them lived at villas in the area, as was probably the case with this guy. The skull rack. Inside a cave in Chiapas, Mexico, archaeologists have discovered hundreds of decapitated skulls. The cave is called Cueva de Comalapa, and it was first discovered in 2012. It was the Mexican authorities who were alerted to the cave because those who found it thought they had stumbled upon a crime scene. They thought they had found the lair of a sadistic serial killer, but archaeologists quickly dispelled that rumor, then got to work removing the human remains and doing forensic inspections. A more recent study confirmed the skulls to be about 1,000 years old, and experts believe they had originally been placed on something called a zompantli. That's the pre-Hispanic name for a skull rack, something like a display rack only used to show off the severed heads of war captives and victims of sacrifice. The skulls would be arranged on vertical posts, with each post connected by a crossbeam. Picture a giant trellis, only lined with human heads instead of plant vines. We don't know exactly how many human heads were put on display in this cave, nor why they were put in the cave in the first place. It would have been a pretty ghoulish thing to see 1,000 years ago, a cavern of death lit by small fires. Researchers believe it may have been some kind of altar, perhaps where the mysterious pre-Hispanic people who lived here came to give praise to their god of death.
The door to the underworld. The Aktun Tunichil Muknal Cave, also known as the ATM Cave, is located deep in the western jungles of Belize. The cave was once believed to be a sacred entrance to Xibalba, the underworld of the Maya people. For over 1,000 years, the mysterious underground system of tunnels and passages remained totally undisturbed. Then, in 1986, locals rediscovered the entrance. Archaeologists found out about it, and specialist Thomas Miller found skeletons inside. Over the following decades, the ATM cave became popular with scientists and travelers as a place to gain insight into the ancient Maya religion. The Maya used the cave from as early as 700 BC until their collapse in 900 AD. It was a place to connect with their dark deities. However, the truth of their rituals and ceremonies has always remained elusive. We know they went down into the darkness and communicated with spirits and gods, but we don't know what that looked like. It wasn't until 2021 that archaeologist Holly Moyes from the University of California came up with a theory. Holly suggested the Maya staged elaborate performances of their creation myth, like what you might think of as live theater. They did this perhaps as a way to goad their gods into rebirthing the world following political upheaval and devastating drought. But as we already know, it didn't work. Drought decimated their food supply, and the Maya civilization collapsed. Mysterious Norse settlement. Archaeologists recently uncovered a Norse farmstead from the 10th century AD, occupied from between roughly 940 and 1300. It was likely one of the very first farmsteads to be built in Iceland when the Vikings settled there in the 9th century. Nobody knows exactly why the Norse fled Norway and settled Iceland, but many experts have blamed it on civil strife and shortage of land. Whatever the case, Iceland was firmly in the hands of the Norse by the 10th century. On the outside, this ancient settlement seems normal enough. It was discovered behind a modern farmhouse, right in the middle of a quiet Icelandic community. But the lost settlement has a mysterious past. Researchers believe it was buried following a volcanic eruption in 1362. The settlement, after lasting 400 years, was obliterated by an ice-covered volcano the Norse called Nabafeljökull, but it is now called Öræfajökull. Scientists aren't sure what exactly happened here. This site was definitely buried by ashfall, although it doesn't look like the citizens were killed and preserved in stone like those at Pompeii. Instead, it looks like the villagers knew what was coming, saw that the volcano was going to explode, and they left their homes before they could be burned alive. Vindolanda. Vindolanda is one of the most impressive Roman auxiliary fortresses still standing today. It can be found at the fringe of the ancient Roman Empire, not far from the famous Hadrian's Wall. The fort was constructed in the same era as 9 other Roman fortresses in the region between 85 and 370 AD. They were built to keep out the menacing tribes of the north and to protect weary travelers bringing goods in and out of the region. Vindolanda in particular was built next to the major Roman highway known as the Stane Gate. But what kind of mysteries does this fortress hold? As an active archaeological site, Vindolanda has revealed plenty of secrets from Roman-occupied Britain. Researchers have excavated thousands of artifacts, things from textiles to shoes, random wooden objects, and even a workshop. Most recently, they dug up a rare copper alloy mouthpiece from an ancient musical instrument called a cornu. A cornu was a large horn carried by the cornisan, or the hornblower. He was the man in the legion who interpreted the general's orders as horn blows that could be heard by all the men on the field of battle. It was almost like an ancient blowhorn. The general would give an order, the hornblower would blast a certain number of toots from his cornu, and the soldiers would know exactly what to do. Local curator Barbara Burley called the most recent discovery really exciting. She said we already knew that these kinds of instruments existed, but finding physical examples is next level. Discoveries like these at Vindolanda are helping historians paint a much clearer picture of how Roman legions functioned, and of course, of what everyday life at Roman fortresses looked like. I wanted to give a big shout out to Carol Freeman and Denise Ramos Gonzalez. Thanks so much for watching. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family. Burkina Faso. The ancient metallurgy sites of Burkina Faso are fantastic, and yet sort of unbelievable. Archaeologists have found multiple sites with evidence of metalworking stretching back to 800 BC. These were once grand villages and towns where the people worked heavily with metal. The production of iron was a huge blessing to the culture and economy here, yet modern historians can't understand how it all happened. 2,800 years ago, a group of people living in the harsh lands of Burkina Faso suddenly developed tools and started working with metal. They mined everything from gold to marble. In other nearby regions of Africa, these metals were things of luxury. Not many local cultures had access to the raw metal material or to the advanced technology to mine it. There are 5 main metalworking complexes spread throughout Burkina Faso. Each one was responsible for its own iron extraction. The sites are all abandoned these days, left with the ruins of draft furnaces and ancient mining equipment. We don't know why the sites were abandoned, what happened to the people, or how they became masters of metal when everyone around them was still struggling with stone and copper. Newly discovered Egyptian settlement. The fabulous city of Meroe was founded on the shores of Lake Merotis, Egypt, during the days of Alexander the Great. That's about 30 miles from Alexandria. This settlement started in the 3rd century BC and grew to be a major industrial center and port. It was inhabited all the way until the 8th century AD, watching dynasties rise and fall. The city stood through the collapse of ancient Egypt, the rise of Roman occupation, the introduction of the Byzantines, and then was destroyed in the Islamic period. Recently, archaeologists made some interesting discoveries while excavating Meroe. Researchers with the University of Warsaw uncovered an entirely new precinct from between the 6th and 8th centuries. They came across small buildings that had been built on the ruins of an old Roman farm producing wine. It's a shocking discovery because it shows that even 1400 years ago, Roman ruins were ruins. The only difference is that instead of preserving the ruins, the people who came after built over them. There's more mystery to be had here as well. Researchers believe the neighborhood may have been used by pilgrims in the 6th century who were on their way to the mysterious Christian shrine in Abu Mena. This was long after the days of the Egyptian gods, when most of Egypt was occupied by Christians. After the Islamic conquest, though, that all started to change. The latter city of Çatalhöyük. The proto-city of Çatalhöyük is in present-day Turkey, located within the modern city of Konya. 8,000 years ago, Çatalhöyük was a small society with a population of between 3,000 to 8,000 people. It was one of the most bizarre ancient cities in the world because it had no streets, no alleyways, and no conventional way into the metropolis. It was built entirely of square houses piled one next to the other in a tight grid. You can think of the city like a cube. There were thousands of dwellings, but they were all wedged next to each other like cubicles in an office. The only way to get from one cubicle to another, or from one dwelling to another, was by climbing and crawling. You would have to climb a ladder to the roof, then crawl across the roof and descend a ladder into somebody else's house. There was no other way to get around. To make things even more interesting, researchers believe there were bodies buried underneath the dwellings. Researchers from Adam Mickiewicz University recently excavated one of the larger mud brick houses and found that it was built on top of a layer of 12 clay platforms. Researchers believe these platforms hide bodies and that the locals may have buried their loved ones right beneath their own feet. Wolsey's Air. Wolsey's Air is a prehistoric landscape in the United Kingdom currently being devastated by coastal erosion. A team of researchers recently investigated the coastland here looking to record the effects of the climate crisis, only to accidentally discover an ancient piece of history. They found a rare shard of pottery 4,000 years old, along with a mysterious stone box. The shard was found sitting precariously on the shoreline and likely would have been swept away the next time the tide came in. Excited about the discovery, the volunteers launched a drone to survey the area. They identified evidence of human habitation from the Neolithic era, such as a half-submerged stone house almost totally swallowed by the rising sea. The thing about Wolsey's Air and many coastal sites across the UK is that they are slowly being destroyed. As the coast is washed away, the villages once occupied by ancient Britons are being washed away as well. This is a rare example of coming across Neolithic history as it is in the midst of being buried underwater forever. The mysterious stone box has experts particularly excited. It's made from thin slabs of stone, perhaps recycled roof tiles. Circular holes were made to secure the slabs, turning the object into a prehistoric lockbox. It may have been used as a cold storage, like an early fridge. It also may have been a hiding place for Bronze Age contraband. The East Bay Mystery Walls. For over 100 years, the people in California's Bay Area have been perplexed by the existence of mysterious stone walls. These walls are scattered across tall ridges from San Jose to the Berkeley Hills. Some of the walls are in long, straight lines. Some form obtuse angles. There are even the ruins of mysterious rectangular constructions among them. What nobody knows is who built them, how old they are, or what purpose they served. Some have guessed voyagers from a bygone age, visitors from space, and vanquished Native Americans. What we know for sure is that the oldest public mention is likely in an issue of the San Francisco Chronicle published March 8, 1896. The story back then was that the stone walls baffled experts and were an unsolved mystery. The paper also speculated that the walls may have been built by a forgotten race of people, or maybe even the Aztecs during an expedition north from their main home in central Mexico. The walls themselves are mostly in poor construction. They were made by stacking local limestone rocks one on top of the other. None of them were cut to fit. There was no mortar involved, and they could have been placed by just about anyone. A couple of kids could make a similar wall in a day with enough motivation. Despite the simplicity, the mystery is still unsolved. It's been an enigma since at least 1896, but no one has ever dated the rocks to see how old the walls are. In all honesty, the walls look like perimeter fences around somebody's property. They may have been built around a house or a farm, either by a lost race of people or by early European settlers. Ice holes. NASA has made a bizarre discovery on the Arctic surface. Researchers with NASA's Operation Ice Bridge found holes perforated in the Arctic ice. Holes whose origins are still unclear. According to NASA, the amount of ice in this particular part of the Arctic, north of Alaska and near the Beaufort Sea, has decreased significantly since 2013. Scientists with the operation were measuring the thickness of the ice when they made the mysterious discovery. There were no holes here before, but now it looks like somebody poked a bunch of them in the surface with a giant metal rod. Scientist Nathan Kurtz said he doesn't know what may have led to the formation of the holes. Nathan said he had never seen anything like it. Other experts believe these strange breaks in the ice could be seal breathing gaps. Seals make these gaps in thin ice so that they can easily come up for air. Whatever the case, holes in the ice is not really good news. Researchers believe the holes are likely the result of warmer water flowing into the Arctic from Canada's Mackenzie River, melting what little ice remains. They may have been made by seals, but they were only possible because the ice has gotten so thin. The LSU Mounds. At Louisiana State University, there are a series of mounds that could be the oldest structures in America built by human hands. The mounds are right outside the university. They look like ordinary grass hills you can find in the countryside, but in reality, these things are ancient, dating back at least 11,300 years. This is according to LSU geology professor Brooks Elwood, who doubled the age of the mounds from 5,500 years old based on bone fragments. Brooks took a core sample from the very bottom of the mound from a layer of ashy material. When he put the sample underneath a microscope, he found tiny fragments of bones. These bones had been burned in cooking fires, and they belonged to humans. What this means is that if confirmed, the mounds at LSU are older than the Egyptian pyramids. This discovery could change history and everything we know about human habitation throughout the Americas, not only in Louisiana. As for what the purpose was behind the mounds, that's still a mystery. Researchers have speculated that whoever made them descended from the Clovis culture. The Clovis lived tens of thousands of years ago across North America and hunted mastodons and other prehistoric beasts. Thanks for watching! Which of these ancient places would you love to visit yourself? Or have you already? Let me know in the comments below. And remember to subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you next time. Bye!